The usual story that we're told is that Africans had nothing to do with ancient Egypt, and that everybody knew this up until Afrocentrists came into the picture. I will prove to you that not only is this false, but lots of people from Europe, including people from Britain, were themselves proving and showing the similarities between the Africans south of Egypt and Africans in Egypt. And a lot of them saw this stuff face first with their own hand, with their own eyes, with their own tastes and versions and palettes and whatever else you need to observe something. And when they laid their eyes on the statues of Egypt, they couldn't believe the similarities. When they saw other cultural phenomena that they could only explain by it being born from Africa, you will see what I'm talking about. So, let's get into it. One of these example people is a person called David Livingstone who lived in the 1800s, and he said that the ancient Egyptians, to his surprise, meaning that he did not believe this earlier, to his surprise, the ancient Egyptians resemble the Africans. And I will show you evidence of this in his book called The Missionary Travels and Research in South Africa, including a sketch of 16 years residence in the interior of Africa and a journey from the Cape of Good Hope to Luanda on the west coast, thence across the continent, down the river Zambezi to the Eastern Ocean. This person was one of the first people to ever cross Africa from the top to the bottom, and so he saw multiple people as evidence of what I'm about to read. So, to do an opening statement, you can see how deep it is. He says the mode of spinning and weaving in Angola, and indeed throughout South Central Africa, is so very like the same occupation in the hands of the ancient Egyptians that I introduce a woodcut from an interesting work of Sir Gardner Wilkinson. So he's alleging that the spinning of cotton in Egypt, ancient Egypt, is the same as the rest of Africa, of the Africans that he encountered. And as you can see, he's very familiar when I continue to read. He even provides illustrations to demonstrate. Keep in mind, this book is not about Egypt. This person is not writing a book about Egypt. He's writing a book through the travels of Southern Africa, Congo, and basically sub-Saharan Africa. But he recognizes the similarity with Egypt, and then he makes this comparison. For example, he says the lower figure are engaged in spinning in the real African method, and the weavers in the left-hand corner have their web in the Angolese fashion. Numbers of other articles are brought for sale to these sleeping places. The native smiths there carry the trade. I bought 10 very good table knives made of country iron of 2 people. So basically, he's at a market and he's buying stuff in Angola, and he's recognizing that the method that they use for cotton is done in the way that he was taught the ancient Egyptians did, and he calls it the true African way. And this is only the first part of what he's saying. But here's the most interesting part of this that makes you realize that he himself came to a revelation realizing that the ancient Egyptians are black. We read, all the inhabitants of this region, as well as those of Londa, may be called true Negroes, if the limitations formerly made be borne in mind. The dark color, thick lips, head elongated backwards and upwards and covered with wool, flat noses with other Negro peculiarities are general. But while these characteristics place them in the true Negro family, the reader would imbibe a wrong idea if he supposed that all of these features combined are often met within one individual. All have a certain thickness and pronouncement of lip, but many are met with in every village, in whom thickness and projection are not more marked than in Europeans. All are dark, but the color is shaded off in different individuals from deep black to light yellow. As we go westward, we observe the light color predominating over the dark, and then again, when we come within the influence of damp from the sea air, we find the shade deepen into the general blackness of the coast population. The shape of the head, with its woolly crop, through though general, is not universal. The tribes on the eastern side of the continent, as the Kaffirs, have heads finely developed and strongly European. Instances of this kind frequently seen, and after I became so familiar with the dark color as to forget to, in viewing the countenance, I was struck by the strong resemblance some narratives bore to certain of our own notabilities. Now, if you don't understand the last part, he's saying that in East Africa, there are some people, even though, okay, let's start from the beginning. So he says that there's different Negroes in Africa. The general is that they have darker skin than everybody else. Their head are elongated backwards, which is a feature that you also see in the ancient Egyptians. But right now, he's only talking about modern sub-Saharan Africans. So he talks about how they have dark skin that can range from very black to yellowish. And then he talks about all this other stuff. And then he goes and talks about East Africa and says the East Africans are, to some degree, have some features that are similar to Europeans or Caucasian like features. And of course, he mentions this because it's true in some cases, because people from East Africa did have some mixing in their past. But this is the interesting part. The Bushmen and the Hottentots are exceptions to these remarks, for both the shape of their heads and growth of wool are peculiar. The latter, for instance, springs from the scalp in tufts with bare spaces between, and when the crop is short resembles a number of black peppercorns stuck on the skin, and very unlike the thick frizzly masses which cover the heads of the Bolonda and the Moravi, with every disposition to pay due deference to the opinions of those who have made ethnology their special study, I have felt myself unable to believe that exaggerated features, usually put forth as those of the typical Negro, characterize the majority of any nation of South Central Africa. In the monuments of the ancient Egyptians seem to me to embody the ideal of the inhabitants of Londa better than the figures of any work of ethnology I have met with. So you get that last part. So he says that Londa in Angola, that he's in right now while he's writing this, he says that the people of Angola that he saw, their facial features and their body, they best resemble the ancient Egyptians more than any other people that he's ever met in any place in the world. And then after this, he just talks about more of his journey. And like I said, this is not a propaganda book of how Egyptians look like. This is just a passing thought that he had writing about his travels through Africa. In page 399, he repeats what he said before, and he says, the markets, sleeping places are well supplied with provisions by great numbers of women, every one of whom is seen spinning cotton with a spindle and distaff exactly like those which were in the use amongst the ancient Egyptians. You see what he just said right there again? He repeated himself saying that they spin the wool just like the ancient Egyptians. It's a slightly different point than what he said, because the other one was about weaving and this one's about spinning. But he repeats to show you that, yeah, it's not like a coincidence. It's not one thing. It's multiple things that he sees similar between the Africans, which these people would be Bantu people, by the way, and the ancient Egyptians. On page 625, he goes in again on the Egyptians and says, a great many of the Banyai are of a light coffee and milk color, and indeed this color is considered handsome throughout the whole country, a fair complexion being as much a test of beauty with them as with us, as they draw out their hair into small cords a foot in length, and entwine the inner bark of a certain tree round each separate cord, and dye this substance of a reddish color. Many of them put me in mind of the ancient Egyptians. Again, they put me in mind of the ancient Egyptians. This guy, again, like I said, was born in 1813. He's got nothing to do with Sheikh Anta Diop. He's not an Afrocentrist. He's just a white guy from Britain, a European explorer from Britain who traveled through Africa and saw the statues of Egypt by himself, because he went to Egypt first, and then he went and saw the Africans for the first time in their diversity, in their plenty. And that's his comments on what they look like. He says they look like ancient Egyptians. So when you hear people talking about how, oh, it's just black Africans who see this, they're just making it up, they see it because they want to see it, ask them about this guy. Ask them about David Livingstone and why he kept getting reminded of black Africans every time he sees Egyptians, or why he gets reminded of Egyptians every time he sees Africans. And again, he says on page 449, he says, shoulders together with their general features again remind me of the ancient Egyptians. Several were seen with the upwards inclination of the outer angles of the eyes. And you can see he provides a picture of a Londa lady who's wearing her hair in a crazy way, and you can see that thing around her head. It looks like a structure. It's actually her hair tied to a structure. And this is what Africans used to do long time ago with their hair before Europeans told them to tame it.